Refused to let my dad's affair daughter live with me for school, but now the family is in chaos over my decision. When I was 14, my world shattered. It all came tumbling out that my dad, had been living a secret life right under our noses. Behind my mom's back, he'd fathered a child with one of his employees, a little girl, only 1 year old at the time. Can you imagine? We'd been just your average family, and then, suddenly, I had this half-sister no one had ever mentioned. My brother, who's 2 years older than me, was so devastated that he shut our dad out for a full year. And me. I could barely look him in the eye again after that. I never figured out if my mom secretly knew all along or if she was just heartbreakingly desperate not to lose him. Maybe it was that he had always been the breadwinner, making good money and supporting all of us, who knows? But what I do remember is her clinging to him through group therapy, counseling, and God knows how many arguments. Against all odds, they stayed together. You'd think, after so much, he would have cut off the other family for good. But no. That never happened. He stopped dating Ally's mother, sure, but kept her close as a friend, and, disturbingly, my mom and the other woman seemed to strike up this freaky, sister-wife dynamic. The whole situation was surreal. Every single holiday since then, Christmas, Easter, you name it, this woman would show up, the woman who knew my dad was married and still decided to help him wreck our family. Her little girl, my supposed sister, would be there too, and my brother and I were expected to embrace her as family. I just couldn't do it. My brother took years to come around and even skipped out on holidays altogether for a while. But when Ally turned 4, he did an abrupt U-turn. He suddenly decided he'd be a brother to her. He still won't speak to our dad, or to Ally's mother, but somehow he became Ally's protector. Maybe I sound bitter, but there's no way I've ever seen Ally's mom as anything but a homewrecker. And Ally? She was just a living reminder of how everything had been blown apart. Intellectually, I know my dad was as much to blame, but it was always easier, as a hurt teenager, to direct my anger at them. I made it clear, Ally would never be my sister. That single truth has led to years and years of tension. No holiday, no gathering has felt right since. I could give you a play-by-play of all the drama over the years, but that would take forever, and there's one main point here. Recently, Ally decided she wanted to switch schools. Something happened at her old one, but frankly, I don't care about her high school drama. For context, in my country, high schools can be specialized, art, confectionery, hairdressing, that kind of thing, unlike the more general grammar high school she was attending. Struggling to keep up, Ally dropped out, and decided to try her hand at art school. She's not a prodigy, decent, but nothing mind-blowing, but good enough to get into a well-regarded program. Coincidentally, the school is right near where I live. Ally and her mom are still living near my parents, 3 hours from me, so getting to and from school was going to be a challenge. 2 days ago, we had another of those awkward family dinners. Yes, Ally and her mother were there, to my eternal discomfort. The subject came up, where was Ally going to live for school? I could tell they were circling around the real question, hoping I'd offer before they had to ask. When I didn't bite, they finally spelled it out for me. Would I let Ally move in with me for the school year? Monday to Friday, holidays back with her mom. And, get this, they pitched it like it was a huge benefit to her, because I also work in art. Suddenly, my so-called useless illustration career was the perfect environment for their precious daughter. Let me tell you my reasons for saying no, loud and clear. First, there are decent dorms near the campus, certainly not a 5-star hotel, but perfectly fine for a high school student. Second, I do not like Ally. I've always been honest about our lack of relationship, and no shared DNA is going to magically fix that. Third, my brother lives even closer to the art school, about an hour away. It's not next door, but he's at least on good terms with her. Fourth, when I once went to Ally's mom for help during a rough time and asked for a favor, she laughed in my face and flat out told me we weren't family. But now, suddenly, we're family when it's convenient for her. Fifth, my apartment is modest, and though I technically have a second bedroom, it's rented to my best friend. I'm not kicking my best friend out, no matter what guilt trip anyone tries to lay on me. Sixth, they never so much as asked, they demanded. And when I hesitated, they descended on me like vultures. Ally has anxiety, dorm living would be hard on her, I'm her only real sister, God wants us to be a family, I'm an atheist, my brother's girlfriend is pregnant and nervous around strangers so Ally can't stay there, and I should just evict my roommate because family comes first. The audacity. To be honest, I could tell from the way they were acting that they expected me to hold out for a polite amount of time and then acquiesce, but the instant the conversation got heated and people started shouting, I abandoned all pretense and simply said no. That was it. Ally dashed out of the house in tears, and everyone else fell into an icy silence. I was told to leave, which I did, and someone muttered something absurd about how I'd better go sign up for kindergarten, since I clearly wasn't acting like an adult. Ally's mother later messaged me, and I left her on read. My dad tried calling, but I didn't pick up. I refused to be bullied, yelled at, and guilt-tripped into something that makes me deeply uncomfortable. I know it's not Ally's fault she was brought into this mess, but she's not my family, and I don't owe her a place in my life, much less my home. That's where I stand. Update 1. When I got home, I walked in on Ally sobbing on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, completely unraveling. My roommate quickly pulled me aside and filled me in on what had just happened. Apparently, Ally had shown up expecting to see me, and was stunned to find my roommate there instead. She immediately asked if my roommate was visiting or about to leave, to which my roomie calmly replied that she was neither. That sparked a one-sided argument with Ally growing louder and louder while my roommate kept trying to shush her and de-escalate the situation. Before long, Ally seemed to have some kind of breakdown. My roommate called it a panic attack, and I have no reason to doubt her at all. But as soon as Ally saw me, her meltdown shifted direction. She started screaming at me, calling me a horrible sister, a liar, a leech, and sent more insults flying my way. I could wrap my head around the horrible sister part, but a liar and a leech? It stung. I did my best not to snap back, kept my patience, and eventually calmed her down just enough so we could talk without broadcasting our family disaster to the entire building. That's when the truth started to come out. Turns out Molly and my dad had been using the idea of Ally living with me and going to that fancy art high school as leverage for at least 6 months, ever since Ally decided to leave her Stepping Stone High School. They threw it at her again and again: get good grades or you won't live with your sister, clean your room or else, hand in your phone, and, even worse, demanded she drop friends or delete her social media. Basically, the possibility of living with me had become her carrot, dangled in front of her for ages. I felt awful when I realized it. To be honest, I didn't doubt her story for a second. It was classic dad. That was his tactic growing up, too: promise us something big and let us tear ourselves up hoping, only for him to maybe deliver, maybe not. Apparently, Molly went as far as to tell Ally I'd agreed to a trial run for a week and that afterward she'd go back to her dad's for the rest of the summer to prepare for the actual move. I had absolutely no idea they'd promised her that, especially since I had been clear from the start that I was against the idea. Looking back, maybe they figured that if Ally showed up at my door, I'd just cave, since I've stepped back so many times in the past to keep the peace. Maybe having Ally right there in my home would make it impossible for me to say no, and I'd let myself get steamrolled again so I wouldn't crush her dream. The whole thing sucked, but for the first time ever, Ally and I actually talked. Really talked. 40% of it was us trash talking our parent in common, 40% was venting about Molly, and the rest was just about art. Oddly enough, I found a silver lining in that mess. I'm not saying I'm suddenly ready to play the doting big sister or take her in, but for once, there was some real connection under all the pain. Eventually, she crashed on my bed, asleep before her parents arrived to pick her up. I waited, just sitting there, emotionally exhausted. My dad finally showed up around 11 p.m., furious that Ally had managed to fall asleep and incredulous that I hadn't just let her spend the night. But I was even angrier. After piecing together Ally's story, I was dying to hear his side, too. At the very least, he listened. I let out a 5-minute rant so fast I could barely breathe, and by the time he managed to say anything, I doubt he even remembered half of what I said. I barely gave him a chance. All he told me was that he'd call me later to properly discuss it. Now, here I am, waiting for that call, feeling emptier than ever. I'm so emotionally drained I could barely think straight at work. I ended up crashing at my friend's place for the night. Nothing romantic, just the comfort of platonic closeness, the kind we've had since we were kids. I know I have a lot to sort out, and I've started making a list of everything I need to do when I finally find the energy to try again. Right now, I'm just hoping for some clarity and a little peace, if I can ever find it. Update 2. I apologize for my silence. Life has been such a whirlwind that finding the time or the energy to update felt impossible. But I have to share what's happened. I really appreciated all the advice and just knowing that I wasn't crazy, even though this update probably won't satisfy anyone hoping for a happy ending. Not long after everything blew up, Ally, my half-sister, showed up at my door, almost as if the universe was playing a dark little joke. The timing couldn't have been more ridiculous. I didn't waste a second. I called my dad and told him to pick her up immediately or I was getting the police involved. He came, insisting that he'd explain everything, but predictably, it took some real cornering before he said a word. Maybe he assumed that if he told me just enough, I'd stop bothering him, but I needed answers, so I went to see him face to face last week. There was no escape for him then. What I learned was every bit as wild as I expected. Ally's mom, Molly, as I've called her, was in dire financial straits. Part of me wanted to blame it on her being too young when she had a child, but honestly, Molly's entire sense of maturity is stunted. Maybe there was a traumatic childhood, maybe not, I don't even care at this point, because whatever happened, it's Ally who's paying the price. Molly had made a mountain of debt for herself, taking out too many loans with no realistic way to pay them back. Now she's basically losing everything in this debt cleanup process. Even her salary is being cut by the state, leaving her with barely enough to survive. To make ends meet, she decided to sell her apartment and move into something so small it made me physically cringe when I saw it. She wanted to stay at my dad's house, but, thankfully, my mom had already set strict boundaries. Molly and Ally weren't allowed at the house for longer than a week, special occasions only, like when Molly's building was under construction. Her plan? Buy this glorified chicken coop of a studio apartment and squeeze herself and Ally into that tiny space. The logic must have been, Maybe someone else will step in to help, because suddenly I was getting all sorts of guilt-trippy hints that I should take Ally in. As if that would solve everything. Against my instincts, I let Ally stay with me for a while. It was a disaster. Living with her was simply impossible. I never realized just how troubled she really was because I was never engaged with her long enough to truly see it. She was plagued by night terrors, which left my best friend, a total light sleeper who works a physically brutal job, exhausted every single day. On top of that, Ally seemed allergic to cleaning and she even stole my watch. After that, I called my dad and told him to solve it because I wasn't going to put up with this anymore. My dad begged me, practically groveling, to let her stay. She'll get better, he promised, but even if that were true, I wasn't about to be the one suffering through the process. I drew a line in the sand. I'd only consider taking Ally in if she went to therapy. But Molly, in her infinite wisdom, doesn't believe in therapy. Of course. Honestly, I shouldn't have been surprised. I figured my dad would finally step up and take Ally in, but my mom was adamant. She absolutely refused. That led to a huge fight, and in the end my mom suffered a panic attack and wound up hospitalized. That was the final straw. Ally was sent back to her mom. Molly was livid, but at me, not at her own decisions. According to her, I'm the only person in the world who could offer them a real home, but I'm just too hateful to make space for them. Hate is her word, but if I'm being honest, a part of me really is angry, furious at being put in this position. Then my brother got involved, berating me for not stepping up, even though he owns a house. But of course, he has a newborn baby, so that's supposed to absolve him from any responsibility while dumping all of it on me. He had the nerve to say, blood should be thicker than water when I told him my best friend lives with me, as though my blood doesn't count in this equation. Now it feels like everything is in limbo. My dad keeps trying to wear down my mom and when he's not arguing with her, he's flinging passive-aggressive comments at me. Molly bombards me with her own brand of guilt-laden messages, and my brother doesn't even bother to hide his contempt anymore. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'm seriously considering cutting everyone off completely. It's honestly crushing to watch my whole family turn on me. At least I have my best friend, she's probably the only good thing to come out of this ordeal. I still feel terrible that I put her through exhaustion and let my dad manipulate me for so long, but I'm endlessly grateful she's still with me. Update 3. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. Last Tuesday, my best friend came home from work looking absolutely shattered. At first, I figured it was just another brutal day at her job, but when she sat me down with that serious expression I've only seen twice in our 15-year friendship, my stomach dropped. She'd been getting calls. Anonymous ones, always when I wasn't around. The caller would hang up the moment she answered, but she could hear background noise, a TV, kids playing. It was creepy enough that she'd started letting calls go to voicemail. Then, 3 days ago, Molly showed up at her workplace. My best friend works at a veterinary clinic, and Molly waltzed in claiming she needed to discuss urgent family matters about me. She cornered my friend during her lunch break and launched into this unhinged rant about how I was poisoning everyone against Ally, how I was selfish and heartless, and, this is where it gets truly insane, how my friend was enabling my cruelty by living with me instead of making space for real family. My friend, bless her, told Molly exactly where she could shove her opinions and threatened to call security. But Molly wasn't done. She actually had the audacity to offer my friend money, 2 months' rent, to move out temporarily so Ally could have the room. When my friend refused, Molly's mask completely slipped. She started screaming about how my friend was a leech living off me, how she was probably sleeping with me, anyway, and how no real friend would stand in the way of family. Security had to escort Molly out, but not before she shouted loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear that my friend was a homewrecker keeping sisters apart. My poor friend was mortified, especially since her boss and several clients witnessed the whole meltdown. But here's where it gets truly twisted. When I confronted my dad about Molly's behavior, expecting him to be horrified, he actually tried to defend her. She's desperate, he said. You have to understand, she's losing everything. When I pointed out that harassment and workplace stalking aren't acceptable regardless of someone's financial situation, he had the nerve to suggest that maybe if I'd just helped family from the beginning, none of this would have happened. That's when something clicked. I asked him point blank if he knew about Molly's plan to harass my friend. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he admitted that Molly had mentioned she might try to reason with my roommate directly. He didn't stop her. He knew she was planning to ambush my friend at work, and he did nothing. I was so angry I could barely speak, but then he dropped another bombshell. Apparently, my mom has been having what he calls episodes since the hospital incident. She's been obsessing over the whole situation, staying up all night researching Ally's new school, even going so far as to call the admissions office pretending to be Ally's guardian to ask about housing options. My dad seems genuinely worried about her mental state, but instead of getting her proper help, he's been trying to solve the problem by pushing me harder to take Ally in. If you'd just agree to let her stay for the school year, he said, your mother could finally have peace. We could all move past this. The manipulation was so blatant it actually made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that surprised even me. I told him that mom's mental health wasn't my responsibility to fix by sacrificing my own peace and safety. That's when he really lost it. Safety? He yelled. She's a 17-year-old girl, not a criminal. Your own sister. Half-sister, I corrected, and not by choice. He hung up on me. 2 days later, my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I should have known something was up when he actually knocked instead of just walking in like he usually does. He looked exhausted, the baby's been keeping him up, and his girlfriend's been having a rough time with postpartum depression. I felt a flicker of sympathy until he started talking. Turns out, Dad had called him with a new solution. Since my brother's house has more space and he's supposedly on better terms with Ally, maybe she should live with him instead. But here's the kicker, his girlfriend absolutely refused. She's struggling enough without adding a troubled teenager to the mix, especially one with night terrors and behavioral issues. So naturally, my brother decided this was all my fault. If I'd just taken Ally in from the beginning, none of them would be dealing with this stress. His girlfriend wouldn't be crying herself to sleep over the pressure from Dad. Mom wouldn't be having breakdowns. Everyone's problems would be solved if I'd just do the right thing. I pointed out that he could have offered to take Ally himself months ago, but he shook his head. I never wanted her living with us, he said. But you live alone with just a friend. You have the space. You work from home. It makes sense. The entitlement was breathtaking. When I reminded him that I'd already tried living with Ally and it had been a disaster, he actually suggested that maybe I hadn't tried hard enough. Maybe if I'd been more patient, more understanding, more sisterly, that's when I'd had enough. I told him that if he was so concerned about family obligations, he could move his pregnant girlfriend and newborn baby in with Dad and Mom, freeing up his house for Ally and Molly. The look on his face was priceless, pure horror at the suggestion. That's completely different, he sputtered. I have a family to think about.
So do I replied.
My chosen family. My friend who's been with me through everything while you all demand I throw her out for someone who stole from me. He left after that, but not before telling me that I was being selfish and that I'd regret pushing everyone away. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am selfish. But I'm tired of being the family scapegoat, the one everyone expects to sacrifice her happiness and stability for the sake of keeping the peace. I'm tired of being guilt-tripped and manipulated and having my boundaries stomped on. My friend and I have started looking at apartments in a different part of the city, somewhere my family doesn't know about. I haven't told them yet, but I think I'm done. With all of it. With all of them. The saddest part? I genuinely feel bad for Ally. None of this is really her fault, she's just a kid caught in the middle of adult dysfunction. But I can't save her without destroying myself, and I'm finally accepting that it's not my job to try. Update 4. I never thought I'd be back here writing another update, but life has a sick sense of humor. The apartment hunting didn't go as planned. Turns out finding a decent place in our budget that accepts pets, my friend has a cat I forgot to mention, is harder than expected. But that's the least of our problems now. 3 weeks ago, my friend Sarah came home looking like she'd seen a ghost. I was in the middle of a client call when she burst through the door, so I had to quickly wrap up before she could tell me what happened. She'd been at the grocery store when she ran into my brother's girlfriend, Emma. Apparently Emma looked terrible, dark circles, disheveled, the works. What should have been a polite hello turned into Emma breaking down right there in the cereal aisle. Between the sobs, Emma told Sarah everything. My brother has been putting massive pressure on her to reconsider taking Ally in. He's been coming home every day with new arguments. Ally's grades are suffering, she's depressed living in that tiny studio with Molly, it's just temporary until they figure something else out. But Emma's barely keeping her head above water with the baby and her postpartum depression. The idea of adding a volatile teenager to the mix was sending her into panic attacks. Here's where it gets twisted. My brother had apparently been telling Emma that I'd basically agreed to take Ally but was just being difficult about logistics. He made it sound like I was playing games while a child suffered. Emma felt guilty about refusing when, in her mind, I was already willing to help but just needed to be convinced properly. Sarah, bless her, set the record straight immediately. She told Emma exactly what had happened, the theft, the night terrors, Molly's workplace harassment, all of it. Emma went pale and asked why no one had told her any of this. That's when Sarah realized my brother had been lying to everyone, spinning different versions of the story to manipulate each person into feeling guilty. But wait, it gets worse. Emma apologized to Sarah and then said something that made my blood run cold. I just wish I understood why he's so desperate to help her now when he completely ignored her for years. When Sarah asked what she meant, Emma explained that my brother had been having private phone calls with someone, always stepping outside or going to the garage. She'd assumed it was work stuff until she overheard part of a conversation last week. She heard him say, "I know, but I can't keep doing this forever," and she doesn't suspect anything, but the guilt is killing me. Emma confronted him about it that night. He broke down and confessed that he'd been sending money to Molly. Not just recently, for years. Apparently, right after Ally was born, Molly had contacted him claiming she was struggling financially and that Dad wasn't providing enough support. My brother, feeling guilty about rejecting Ally initially, started sending her money monthly. Small amounts at first, then more and more as Molly's demands increased. The real kicker? Molly had been telling him that Dad didn't know about the payments and that it needed to stay secret because Dad was already doing so much. She painted herself as this struggling single mother too proud to ask for more help from dad. My brother ate it up, probably because it made him feel like he was being a good brother without actually having to have a relationship with Ally. But here's where the story takes a sharp left turn. Emma did some digging through my brother's bank statements and discovered he'd sent Molly over $15,000 in the past 3 years. $15,000. Money that should have gone toward their house, their wedding, preparing for the baby. Emma was livid, but my brother begged her not to say anything because he was trying to fix it. That's why he's been so desperate to get Ally living somewhere else. Molly had been threatening to tell dad about the money if the payment stopped. She claimed she'd tell dad that my brother had been secretly supporting his daughter all these years while publicly rejecting her, making him look like a massive hypocrite. My brother was trapped in this blackmail scheme, and his solution was to get me to take Ally so the pressure would be off him. Sarah came home with all this information, and I honestly didn't know what to do with it. Part of me felt vindicated. I knew something was off about my brother's sudden change of heart. But mostly I felt sick. The entire family has been lying and manipulating each other for years. I decided to call Emma directly. She was hesitant to talk at first, but eventually everything poured out. She's been considering leaving my brother over this. Not just the money, though that was bad enough, but the lies, the manipulation, the way he's been making her feel guilty for protecting her own mental health. She said she felt like she didn't even know who she married anymore. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that my brother wasn't just being manipulative about Ally, he'd been living a lie for years, just like dad had. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess. I told Emma she deserved better and that none of this was her fault. I also told her that if she ever needed a place to stay while she figured things out, my couch was available. Not for Ally, not for my brother, but for her and the baby if they needed an escape. She started crying and said she'd been feeling so isolated, like everyone in the family was against her for not taking Ally in. Finding out the truth about why my brother was so insistent made her feel less crazy, but also more hurt. The strangest part? She asked if I thought she should tell dad about the money. I told her that was her decision, but that dad probably already knew. Call it intuition, but this whole situation reeks of secrets within secrets. 2 days later, dad showed up at my door again. But this time, he looked defeated rather than angry. He sat down heavily on my couch and said, "We need to talk about your brother." Turns out, I was right. Dad had known about the payments for months. He discovered them by accident when my brother accidentally sent a payment confirmation email to dad's email address instead of his own. Apparently their email addresses are similar and it was an autofill mistake. Dad confronted Molly, who broke down and admitted she'd been manipulating my brother for years. But here's the part that made me want to scream. Dad had been letting it continue because it meant less pressure on him to support Molly and Ally. He was essentially letting my brother subsidize his mistake while positioning himself as the good guy trying to bring the family together. The web of lies and manipulation is so deep I'm getting dizzy thinking about it. Dad using my brother's guilt to avoid his own responsibilities. My brother using manipulation to try to force me into solving his blackmail problem. Molly exploiting everyone's guilt to fund her lifestyle. Mom probably having breakdowns because she senses all the lies even if she doesn't know the details. And me? I'm apparently the only one who's been honest about not wanting any part of this mess, which somehow makes me the villain. Dad asked if I'd consider taking Ally now that I knew the full truth. I laughed, actually laughed, and told him that learning about even more layers of lies and manipulation didn't exactly make me more eager to get involved. That's when he dropped the final bombshell. He and Mom are considering divorce. Mom found out about him knowing about the payments and feels betrayed all over again. She's been staying at her sister's house for the past week. So now my brother's marriage is falling apart, my parents are headed for divorce, Molly is probably panicking about her money source drying up, and Ally is still stuck in the middle of all this adult dysfunction. And somehow, I'm still the bad guy for wanting to stay out of it. I don't even know what to feel anymore. Part of me is tempted to tell everyone to figure it out themselves and block all their numbers. But another part of me, probably the part that's been trained by years of family guilt, wonders if I should try to help somehow. Sarah thinks I should stay far away from all of them. She's probably right. But it's hard to watch your entire family implode, even when you know they brought it on themselves. I guess we'll see what happens next. At this point, I'm expecting anything.